So Trump's day one executive orders seem to be an end to what I'm calling peak woke. Woke has peaked, and now it is on the decline again. And of course, it's not going to vanish completely. I don't think anyone who's serious will suggest that it's just going to vanish overnight when Trump wills it. That's not how the world works. But I think it will become a sort of niche subcultural thing. It's going to move out of prominence, and I'll go on to the reason why I think that will happen. It's going to become similar to like punk or emo, in that you'll still see people in the wild, but they're their sort of own subculture, separate from the mainstream, and they're not necessarily going to try and impose it on them, hopefully. And now that we're at this point where the woke is being put away, it's time to reflect on what has been and use that to predict what will happen in the future, because I think that there is now a sort of large void where you could potentially fill it with another ideology or adapt wokeness in a way that allows it to exist once more. And I think to do that, we actually need to understand what woke is, and I've got some research hot off the press for us to do that. But first, it's worth mentioning what Trump has actually done. So he's signed 2 executive orders that are sort of very symbolic strikes at the heart of what woke is. The first one ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing, basically saying that yes, you can't discriminate against white men, is the gist of this, isn't it? And of course, as with lots of other things, we've seen lots of the tech companies fall in line with Trump's rhetoric because they want to ingratiate themselves, and hopefully we'll see a lot more of that because, of course, DEI programs are unfair against people that need not be discriminated against.
I think there is another reason for the tech companies, which is more self-interested, which is generally speaking, they want to actually have good people working for them to generate money for them, and DEI just makes it so you have to hire not the best people.
That's true.
You have to pay them just a treasure amount of a salary.
Mm-hmm. And another thing as well is gender ideology. So basically race and gender were the main sort of prongs of wokeness, for want of a better way of putting it. And here he's basically saying that there are only men and women and that you can't change gender and things like this, which is just common sense, really. And it's good to see, but hopefully this is going to propagate into wider society to a greater degree. And I think it will to a certain extent, because it was getting a little bit grating on a lot of people, wasn't it? These sorts of ideas.
It's time we become unburdened by the wokeness that has been.
That's true. Good reference there, Stelios. And if you appreciate what Trump has done here, if you want him to keep these executive orders on the sheet, what you could do is support him by wearing a cool T-shirt from Lotus Eaters. This is, each shirt you order, Trump gets a little bit stronger. This is not scientific advice, but my shaman told it to me. They're good. We've still got some left over from the election, and if you would like one, they look cool. If you want to commemorate him becoming president, this is your way of doing so, whilst also supporting us.
And also, if you want him to go Super Saiyan mode against wokeness, buy our T-shirts.
There we go. Thank you, Stelios.
You're welcome, Brother John.
So it's worth sort of outlining very briefly. I know both of you are more than well acquainted with what wokeness is, but I just wanted to nail down a quick definition. So it's basically intersectionality, which is something I will define. I'm not going to define it with another obscure term, which is a stupid person's impression of how smart people understand human variation, more or less. And who better to turn to define what intersectionality is than the Scottish government, of course, because they've got it on their website. There should be, here we go. So it says, Crenshaw, who we'll be addressing in a second, provided the following definition of intersectionality. Intersectionality is a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves and create obstacles that often are not understood amongst conventional ways of thinking, which is a very wordy way of putting it.
So if we read behind the lines, basically intersectionality leads to an oppression calculus, and it says that we have groups, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we create a rank of which group is the most oppressed and which is the least oppressed, and we try to have a two-tier society or a many-tier society that positively discriminates in favor of those who are pronounced to be let's say, the more oppressed. And And for some reason, they always tend to be the latest ally of the left, or
Funny how that works out, isn't it?
yeah.
It's just the whining of minorities.
It is, exactly. So this all comes from the 1989 book from Kimberly Crenshaw, which has a very long and annoying, wordy, jargony title.
Black feminist critique done. I'm asleep. Get it out of my face.
It's got black feminist critique, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics.
Anti-discrimination,
which is anti-white.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. So you've seen these sorts of things conceptualized like this. Intersectionality. You've got a Venn diagram here of race, ethnicity, gender, abilities, so basically whether they're disabled or not, sexual orientation. This one's got nationality, which is a bit strange, but class as well. I think class tended to be a bigger focus in Europe than it did in America. And then here's another one as well that's similar. You see these circulating a lot, and these are from the people teaching this sort of thing.
It's really interesting that they have it, because they have it because they want to support the revolutionary movements across the globe that they perceive to have revolutionary momentum. And also it actually says a lot that a lot of the times people who advocate for, you say, internationalism, they're basically stooges for foreign nationalism.
That's very true.
Nationalisms.
I think the simplest way to sum it up is, at its heart, it's always just been anti-whiteism. Just remember the Smithsonian display about what whiteness is from a few years back, where it was saying that whiteness is things like objective understanding of reality, certain standards to
turning
keep
up on time.
Yeah, to keep time, certain ways of viewing and understanding the world. If you take the opposite approach to all of those, that's wokeism. Because it takes what it understands as being the traits of white societies, European societies, and says they're all bad because, realistically, non-Europeans don't really compete very well in those circumstances.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't put it better myself. And yes, why does Kimberly Crenshaw propagate these sorts of ideas? Well, it's because she is not white herself. She is an African-American woman.
A black feminist critique was written by a black woman?
I know, who would have thought? So it can also...
she got triangles for earrings.
I don't know. She moonlights as a member of a band.
As a musical instrument.
Yes. But
Jingle bells, you know.
Intersectionality can also sort of trace elements of critical theory, which was developed by the largely Jewish Frankfurt School set up in the 1920s in response to the interwar Weimar German culture, and there are figures such as Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and basically critical theory and what intersectionality inherits from that. And this is a definition of critical theory, is that it centers on analyzing and challenging systemic power relations in society, arguing that knowledge, truth, and social structures are fundamentally shaped by power dynamics between dominant and oppressed groups. And intersectionality basically takes this wholesale, to borrow an American phrase, and says that yes, the oppressed group is being oppressed by the society of the oppressors, and they analyze things on the basis of power dynamics.
Exactly, and it works cumulatively, because they will say that, well, if you're black, you're more oppressed than white. If you're a woman, you're more oppressed than a man. But if you're a black woman, you're even more oppressed than a black man.
And also, if you're a black woman who's a Muslim lesbian who's disabled, you are lesbian, the most morally uncriticisable human being ever. You are basically perfect.
And therefore the most fit to lead and make decisions.
Yes, apparently so, which doesn't really follow in my mind.
And Josh, can I add something here?
Of course.
So what is interesting here is that these people have always been explicit. It is the centers of actual power that have used DEI that haven't been. So they are saying that if we tie in the intersectionality with the oppression calculus, and you have the whites as being from the beginning the oppressors, they literally say they're anti-white by being discriminating against white people. But it is the institutions that have used wokeness who try to shield that fact and say everyone, and they did say that everyone who pointed that out was basically far-right racist, according to...
But a lot of these sort of intellectual justifications for these ideas are sort of window dressing for the real aim of these ideas, which is extracting resources, ultimately, from white people. And it's not that many of these people want to be accepted by white society, because they have active contempt for it. And so it's not about acceptance or, having a more welcoming society. It's about, I want to take your stuff. And you need only look at the fact that what is associated with woke behaviour, what actual tangible things could you say are linked to it? Well, DEI, which, is about securing financial situations.
Anti-meritocracy.
Exactly. Reparations, which is a bit more explicit. And then there are just sometimes outright calls for wealth redistribution. All of these things are talking about resources. They're not talking about changing society, really. It's all about money, really.
Well, one of the other things that I would say that it could be linked to money as well is advocacy for criminals.
Mm-hmm,
Actively rooting for criminals, which you could say maybe it's not directly linked to resource acquisition, but it's certainly linked to weakening the host society, which makes it easier to acquire resources.
And therefore, I think that most of the people who engaged in woke are actually engaging in financial self-interest. It's not direct necessarily. There's a mediating step, but that's what they've done. And people have understood this for a while, actually. This, of course, is not a real image, as in this isn't a real activist. This was part of a comedy skit, but it captures exactly that sentiment that someone is saying, all white people are racist, therefore PayPal me. It's just cutting out all of the nonsense, but the satire is sort of on point. Yeah. I think the original skit was trying to see if these people would just sit through someone being really rude to them.
I bet they did.
They did. Many of them did.
Of course, I mean, people actively paid like the BLM people to do dinners with them where they told them off for being racist the entire time.
It's amazing to me.
It's so ridiculous.
They convinced me. They're going to pull it off.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go over some of the actual research, because there's been some new research that's come out as of next month. So I've actually seen a sort of pre-screen.
So you've actually been woke and stolen it.
I've not stolen it. I've read it, and I'm going to show it.
You wanted to prove how non-white you were.
by citing my sources and honouring the people who did the hard work.
And stealing it while you're at it.
There's no stealing going on here.
All right.
You want some stealing?
Well, no.
Steal a drink of water here for you, just for you. There you go. Right. So it sort of started, the understanding of these things, in 2012, when there was research conducted by Noor et al. That looked at competitive victimhood. And it's basically suggesting that victims are enabled to claim not only compensation from non-victims, but also immunization from claims of their own moral transgressions, either deceit, intimidation, or violence, and also in transferring resources to themselves or their social group. And it was a way of saying, well, I'm a victim, I am deserving of things, therefore give me stuff.
Yeah.
It's a way of grifting, more or less. And then there was this 2021 study, which I've actually gone over with you, Harry, before. I love this study. Signalling virtuous victimhood as indicators of the dark triad personality. So it's the basic premise is that modern victim signaling is about non-reciprocal resource extraction from institutions or individuals more resource-rich than themselves. And this can come in two forms, but mainly the former. Material, i.e. money, jobs, access to education, or more symbolic things such as respect, tolerance, or compassion. But the symbolic things are much more junior to the money. And of course, the dark triad is a measure of narcissism. Just everyone knows what narcissism is, right? Machiavellianism, which is sort of following your self-interested, ambitions in a very
just immoral
way. Amoral, perhaps, is a better way of putting it. And then psychopathy. Everyone knows what a psychopath is, right? But they used metrics to measure these things in people, and then they asked them to do lots of tasks involving redistributing wealth or trying to convince someone to give them more resources and asking their attitudes. I think there was one where they asked them about their views on counterfeit goods. Is it okay to basically buy counterfeit goods and pass them off as genuine? And people who were more likely to signal their virtuous victimhood as a means of extracting money from people were also more okay with lying about, how they're presenting themselves by these counterfeit goods. And I'm going to read some of the findings. Sorry, Stelios, you wanted to say something?
No, I just wanted to add to this.
Of course.
I think the best way to think about it is if we think examples of people who display these qualities in real life. And I must say, I've met several of these people, I think 3, who constantly play the card that, unless you comply with, my demands, basically, in a covert sense, I'm going to depart from the planet. Mm-hmm. Let me put it this way. So we don't get any issues with YT. But, all of them are alive, and all of them, they were just trying to do mind tricks and try to...
it's manipulation, isn't it?
Exactly, manipulation. And they constantly present the world as if they're victims, because if they present themselves as victims, anything they can do will be seen as self-defense.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to quickly fire through some of the findings of this study and then go on to the new one. They say some people will repeatedly emit the signal in an opportunistic manner to initiate non-reciprocal resource transfer, basically getting resources, money. Our first 3 studies demonstrated how a perceived victim signal can lead others to transfer resources to a victim, but that the motivation to do so is amplified when the victim signal is paired with a virtue signal. So if you're signaling that you're a victim, but you're still virtuous, you didn't deserve to be a victim, because of course being a victim is still not a desirable thing in and of itself. It's only desirable as an end if you can get stuff out of it. And
I'm a victim, but only because I'm such a good and virtuous person. So don't I deserve more from life? Exactly. On the virtue signal, I mean, these sorts of studies always check out with my experience of people. Like I saw a friend recently, and he is a friend, so I'll be gentle here, who was, I brought up Trump, and he immediately started virtue signaling about Trump. Oh, the indictments. Oh, America's a fascist dictatorship. Oh, this and that. Now, I'm not going to say that this person is a psychopath, but I will call him a compulsive and manipulative liar. And that's my personal experience. And he is always, whenever these things come up, the first one to try and jump on letting everybody around him know what a good person he is. No offense if you're watching this.
If you've got to reassure people all the time that you're a good person, perhaps you have doubts yourself. Just saying. But it carries on to say that those higher in dark triad traits signal more often. And so it seems that there's a link between signaling how much of a virtuous victim you are and being basically more evil.
Well, when people constantly tell you, I'm good, and virtuous, they want to create the habit in you of thinking that they are virtuous. Mm-hmm. If they were virtuous and they were confident that you would think they were virtuous, they wouldn't be saying it.
Mm-hmm. And one of their experiments very much illustrates just how malicious they are. Frequent virtuous victim signalers were more likely to cheat and lie to earn extra monetary rewards in the coin flip game, which is one of the psychology experimental designs that is used quite often. And also one of the factors was communal narcissism, which is you're narcissistic but on behalf of your ethnic group, basically, the people you identify with. It was a significant and positive predictor for the frequency of signalling your virtuous victimhood. And their sort of conclusion is this was a very good study. It was multi-parts, sort of each experiment validated further the previous one, and they sort of built up this good understanding. It is 29 pages long, so it's a very comprehensive thing. And then we'll go on to the next one, which is building upon that again. Together, our studies present converging evidence that the virtuous victimhood signal is an effective mechanism for persuading others to part with their resources in a way that benefits the signaler, and that people who tend to engage in amoral social manipulation to achieve their goals are more likely to emit them. Well, there we have it then. Bad people are more likely to do this sort of thing, right? And it's all about extracting money from people, more or less. And then there's another study that comes out next month. I was able to spot it early because they sort of put it in pre-publishing. Is this one? This is from the University of Edinburgh, Virtuous Victimhood as Dark Triad Resource Transfer Strategy. And they're following on from the findings of the previous one. And I'm just going to read the findings of their 2 studies that were basically verifying it. So study 1 replicated significant large association between virtuous victim signaling and communal narcissism, as well as Machiavellianism. So just being nakedly out for extracting resources for your own group, basically. And then study 2 tested the robustness of these associations using an alternative victim signal measure, which also replicated the result once again, and even found a larger effect than in the original study. So it seems like it's all about this sort of thing. Also, they found that sadism is somewhat involved in it, but isn't necessarily as good a predictor, but it does determine how much they enjoyed attacking the people that were supposedly oppressing them. So we've got basically sadistic people who enjoy lying to extract resources from groups they do not identify with. So,
are there any other metrics by which you can divide people on their proclivity towards psychopathy and sadism and other kind of behaviours?
What do you mean metrics here?
Never mind.
I think I know what you're saying. Yes, is the answer. But the first thing that I think would be worth mentioning, well, it's clear for why ordinary people might use these signals, particularly if you're hard up. You might be able to extract resources from someone. Like lots of the people, African Americans, that wanted reparations, it's obvious that they just wanted the money, right? And there's not much more to it than that. But why would say the elite support this thing? And this is where I want your guys' input. And my sort of understanding is that in the same way that multinational corporations actually support greater legislation in that it makes the barrier to entry for potential competitors higher, whilst they have the ability to deal with it because they've got pre-established legal departments, that allows them to eliminate potential competitors and get to preserve their monopoly for longer than they would be able to in an organic market, and therefore they can take a short-term hit for much more money in the long term.
Well, I mean, that's simple Econ 101. We've covered that before.
We have indeed.
Back in contemplation.
So when it comes to woke ideas and people like BlackRock, one of the largest hedge funds in the world, pushed this sort of thing. It makes sense for them to do that because it's basically eliminating competition for them. That's why it's useful to them, even though at the surface level it wouldn't seem like it would be useful.
Well, yeah, the big corporations, they can afford the costs that come with it, whereas the smaller ones can't. So puts them out of business.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of money and power. And you mentioned BlackRock. From the economic aspect, I'll also mention the political one. It's votes. And
there's certainly
there's not that much to it. I mean, body positivity, for instance, it's also an issue of opening yourself to a new market.
That's true. The pharmaceuticals have an incentive to push body positivity because it creates new customers.
Yeah,
big customer base, you could say.
Well, hey, on why they're turning back on this. Some of them. Again, I think when it comes to certain regulations, they're more than happy to absorb the costs. But when all of a sudden the regulations are, if you don't hit these particular diversity targets, the government can sue you. And they start to try and hit those diversity targets, and all of a sudden everything stops working. Then they're more than eager to go, okay, maybe we should just go back to the way it used to be 15, 20 years ago, although I'm aware that as one of the executive orders that Trump has put forward is actually repealing a 1965 executive order that was put forward by Lyndon Johnson, which was one of the first affirmative action ones. Although, obviously, Civil Rights Act of 64 and 91 still basically codify it into law.
Yeah, and it is also worth mentioning as well that I think this for elites has functioned as a raid on income rather than a sustained strategy. They only intended for it to be temporary in a number of years, and then they'll dial it back and there'll be something else, which leads us on nicely to what is in store for the future, because I saw it as a heist or a raid on the private property of ordinary working people. And if you're out to do that sort of thing, you don't want to do it twice because people will expect it for a second time. And therefore, there'll be a new kind of means to keep ordinary people down eventually. That's sort of my guess. And there's it's currently like a transition period in tactics. And sorry, do carry on.
Similarly, in regards to, I don't know, how cohesive a society is, woke is intentionally divisive. And so when you're starting to get history starting back up again with Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Gaza and such, American elite foreign policy, while it will visibly shift under Trump, I expect, a lot of the people who staff the deep state are, unless Doge gets them, going to remain the same, and the sorts of policies that they're going to be going for on an international stage, that being, you know, America global hegemon, spreading democracy around the world, all of those goals are going to say the same. If you want to promote that and you want to have people go out and die for you, you need a cohesive culture. And woke is, I think, partially being pulled back to make sure that, you know, next time you need to get people to sign up for the army, they're not going to do that if they know that the country that they're fighting for hates them.
That's very true. I agree. What do you think, Stelios?
I think whether it's going to be put away or not is ultimately an issue of the left, and whether the Islamist-friendly wing of the left is going to dominate the left. I think this has happened in several places. Definitely, I think it will happen more in Europe. But I don't know to the extent in which it will happen to the US.
Yeah, it remains to be seen, but I think that I've seen signs that things are being dialed back to a significant degree, even amongst left-wing circles. So, we can't know the future, but I think that either it's going to stay around in a sort of residual sense, or there's going to be something else that's going to take its place. That's my sort of cynical understanding. And what I hope to highlight in what I've been saying is now you know what to look for, something that's extractive, that can be pushed by elites to basically keep ordinary people down. I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast, The Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can always follow our series Lads Hour, where we have a bunch of fun. This time we were talking about which world leader wins in a fight. And if you want to see everything else that we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.